Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Turkish airstrike kills 35 Kurdish civilians in Iraq. The Obama administration seeks options for intervention in Syria. And Qatar faces criticism for pushing an Islamic agenda in the region. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Turkish
authorities admitted to killing 35 Kurdish villagers in an airstrike launched by Turkish warplanes on a village in southeastern Turkey near the border with Iraq. The ruling party in Turkey apologized for the killing of Kurdish villagers, indicating the incident was possibly a mistake. The attack, which was described by the major political parties loyal to the Kurds as a crime against humanity, caused clashes between hundreds of protesters and riot police in Diyarbakir province.
Dozens of Kurdish villagers were killed in an airstrike carried out by Turkish warplanes on a target in southeastern Turkey near the border with Iraq. This incident evoked anger among Kurdish communities, while the authorities in Ankara considered it a mistake.
متحدث باسم حزب العدالة والتنمية الحاكم قدم اعتذاره.
A spokesman for the ruling Justice and Development Party offered his apologies for killing the Kurdish villagers, indicating that the incident was possibly a mistake and vowing that there would be no cover-up for any mistakes. The spokesman added that preliminary reports indicated that most of the victims in the air raid were tobacco smugglers from Iraq.
وكان الجيش التركي أعلن أن الغارة الجوية استهدفت مجموعة من مسلحين.
The Turkish army announced that the airstrike targeted a group of gunmen from the Kurdish Workers' Party who were trying to infiltrate the Turkish side of the border from northern Iraq. The army indicated that Turkish drones spotted the gunmen after receiving a warning that they were planning to attack security bases in southeastern areas of the country. Mayor of Uluder village in Sirnak province, Fehmi Yakman, said the village received burned corpses. He accused the state of knowing they were smugglers and asserted that this behavior is unacceptable. The attack, which was described by the major political parties loyal to the Kurds as a crime against humanity, sparked clashes between hundreds of protesters and riot police in Diyarbakir, the largest city in southeastern Turkey, with a majority of Kurdish residents. The protesters threw stones at the police, who used water cannons and tear gas to disperse the rally. The Peace and Democracy Party loyal to the Kurds said that the party leaders are on their way to the region that was attacked, and that they will organize a demonstration in Istanbul and other areas in protest of what caused the casualties.
The local coordination committees in Syria said 41 people were killed by the gunfire of security forces, including one person who was tortured to death in the regime's prisons. In Duma, over 20 people were injured when security forces fired at protesters at the square of the Grand Mosque of Duma as Arab League observers arrived in the city. This comes as the opposition continues to mobilize its supporters, asking them to participate in large numbers in what it called the Friday of the Crawl to the Squares of Freedom.
The tyrant's army is coming in with tanks, shelling anti-regime neighborhoods and protecting pro-regime neighborhoods, cutting off power from opposition neighborhoods and keeping electricity in the loyalists' neighborhoods. Isn't this going to create sectarian tension? So the regime has an agenda, and I will expose this agenda, and I want you to see it with your own eyes and film it with your own cameras.
After assessing the massive damage caused by al-Assad's brigades in the city of Homs and meeting Syrian citizens who are subjected to the regime's killing machine that targets both the young and old, the Arab League's delegation visited 3 Syrian cities. The observers went to Hama, located north of Homs, Idlib, near the Turkish border, and the southern city of Daraa, where protests were ignited in March. The observers were reportedly split into 10-member teams and headed to the 3 cities where they witnessed constant clashes between protesters demanding freedom and the regime's forces.
وأوضح المرصد السوري لحقوق الإنسان أن قوات الأمن أطلقت النار على
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said security forces fired at tens of thousands of demonstrators gathering in the square of the Grand Mosque in the city of Douma as Arab observers arrived at the municipality's building. The observatory added that heavy gunfire could be heard in al-Hajariya neighborhood. Most of the victims died in the countryside of Damascus, and some were killed in Homs, Hama, Idlib, and Daraa. Protesters in the countryside of Damascus were subjected to the army and security forces' gunfire as they waited for the arrival of the Arab League's monitors. Syrian protesters defied the military presence in front of al-Assad's brigades and demanded that the observers protect them. Meanwhile, the city of Kfar Bitna in the countryside of Damascus witnessed the entry of a number of buses with security forces deployed to crack down on protests. In Hama, a large demonstration was held with protesters chanting for the downfall of the regime and al-Assad's resignation. Videos posted online revealed that the dignity strike continues for the 19th day in a number of Syrian cities and towns, including Warat al-Nu'aman and Bosra al-Sham. This comes as the Syrian opposition continues to mobilize its supporters on its social networking sites, asking them to participate in what was called the Friday of the Crawl to the Squares of Freedom.
The Obama administration has instructed the National Security Council to begin seeking options for intervening in Syria. The process will involve top members of the State, Defense, and Treasury departments and will focus on ways to aid the Syrian opposition. It will also include what Washington calls the unlikely option of setting up a no-fly zone. Establishing a no-fly zone over parts of Syria would likely involve large-scale attacks on the Syrian air defense and military command and control systems. Well, let's talk about this with Stephen Lenman, who's a writer and radio host who joins us from Chicago. Well, Stephen Lenman, thanks so much for joining us. It seems the U.S. is following the Libyan scenario, I would think, in Syria. How do you see the U.S. plans to destabilize Syria, which include providing humanitarian aid to rebel forces and establishing a safe zone inside Syrian territory near the Turkish border?
Well, I agree with what you just said entirely. Washington is replicating the Libya model. The only thing missing so far is NATO bombing. But Obama would like to install a no-fly zone. It's possible that the Arab League, as serving Washington, will try to impose it. Syria's defenses are far more formidable than what Libya had. Libya really had no defenses whatsoever against it. But Syria has very capable missiles. They can target aircraft. They can target ocean vessels. Syria is no pushover. It has a strong military. It will resist, but there's no question. Washington, at least since over the last decade, has planned regime change in Syria, other countries in the Middle East, and they're taking them down in the region, starting with Afghanistan, and then Iraq, and then Libya. And Syria is in the spotlight now with terrible violence going on that absolutely is externally generated. Oh, for certain there are legitimate grievances. There are legitimate grievances in all countries, but people don't go out in the streets expressing their grievances by shooting people, by killing security forces. They don't do that. They usually go out non-violently, the way they're doing in Yemen and in Bahrain, and the way they've done it across the region in Egypt and other countries. The violence in Syria is externally generated, and I fear it will continue, and Washington will pursue its regime change aim.
The Bahraini rights group has called on the Interior Ministry to investigate what it calls human rights violations in prisons. Dozens of prisoners have been abused in jail for taking part in anti-regime demonstrations. The inmates have filed a lawsuit against the government, saying they were tortured and put in solitary confinement by the regime. The crackdown on dissent continues across Bahrain more than 10 months into a popular uprising against the ruling Al-Khalifa dynasty. Dozens of demonstrators have been killed by the regime forces since the revolution began back in February.
The state of Qatar rose to prominence during the events of the Arab Spring. Qatar heavily supported Libyan revolutionaries and backed the military campaign against Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi's regime. It is also one of the leading critics of President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. But Qatar is now also subject to criticism for supporting the Islamist agenda in the region. Michael Buchanan reports.
Triumphant celebrations in Qatar's National Day in Doha. For this thumbprint-sized nation, 2011 has been a coming of age, as it sided with protesters in Libya and Syria.
With everyone knowing what Qatar is,
With everyone knowing what Qatar is, it gets known worldwide. And to be honest, this will only bring more business to the country.
We have to show our point of view.
We have to show our point of view, and we have to contribute with whatever we have, be it politics, money, or backing military actions, whatever it takes to support other nations.
Qatar joined NATO's military operations in Libya and provided weapons and training for the Transitional Council's forces, as well as humanitarian aid. It also established the Free Libya TV station and continues to fund it. Qatar is estimated to have spent hundreds of millions of dollars so far in Libya. Why?
They're looking for money. They're very rich, and rich enough. Maybe they're looking for good relations. Maybe they're not looking for anything, only to help their sisters and brothers in Libya. That's it.
Qatar was a primitive state only a few decades ago, but is now becoming a global hub, drawing talent from abroad. But its Arab heritage still matters greatly, and the Arab Spring's revolutions, engulfing regional leaders such as Egypt's, allowed it to come to prominence.
A lot of people in the past were saying why...
A lot of people in the past were asking why Arabs aren't working together to solve their problems. Maybe it was about time that we tried to solve our own problems, you know?
These Libyans celebrating the recent Arab Games in Doha are grateful for Qatar's help. But there is growing concern in Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt that Qatar is supporting and funding Islamist parties.
They're not on some crusade.
They're not ideologically focused. They're not on some crusade to impose Islamist thinking and Islamist parties. They're acting through established relationships and in an effort to try to realize their own interests.
Rich, willing, and able, Qatar has proven itself. Its support for protesters during this tumultuous year will ensure it will continue to play a leading role in the region.
The Cairo Criminal Court acquitted all suspects accused of killing demonstrators in front of the Sayyidah Zainab police station during the events of the January Revolution. Headed by Judge Asim Abdul Hamid, the court found 4 officers and a police commissioner not guilty for the murder of 5 demonstrators and the attempted murder of 6 others during the January 28th and 29 protests.
It's the sentencing phase in the murder case of demonstrators killed in front of the Sayyidah Zainab police headquarters on January 28th and 29th. This news comes after the court held 4 deliberation sessions in which both parties' attorneys presented evidence to the court, headed by Judge Asim Abdul Hamid and members of his judicial panel, Abed al-Manaim, Abed Sattar, and Sami Zain al-Din. At the end of the session, the court rendered a decision.
After review of Articles 304, 251, 267 and 309 of the criminal penal codes. The court finds Shadi Mohammed Abd Hamid Salam, Ihab Abed Aziz Asaidi, Amro Hamdid Hamid Mohammed Al-Harat, Hisham Latfi Mohammed Gamil, Mohammed Shaba Matwali Mohammed, not guilty of all charges. The court transfers the case to the Special Civil Court. This court is adjourned.
4 officers and a police commissioner were found not guilty for the murder of 5 demonstrators and the attempted murder of 6 others in the Syria Zainab district. Despite its similarities to other incidents that erupted in front of police stations during the January Revolution, this case has stirred a wide debate among the feuding parties.
The verdict was unfair to the victims and to the martyrs' families. The general prosecutor should appeal the ruling and provide more evidence. The evidence from the tapes and reports shows that the officers used deadly force against the demonstrators as martyrs fell one after another.
It was a just and fair verdict. Any criminal decision is usually based on written evidence, and the court found that the evidence was not strong enough to convict the defendants. Consequently, the court decided to acquit the 5 defendants. Again, criminal decisions are usually based on conclusive evidence that is beyond reasonable doubt. The tapes and the autopsy reports don't provide conclusive evidence to convict the defendant.
The general prosecutor reserves the right to appeal the ruling if the reasons for acquittal were not solid or inaccurate, if a legal error was committed, or if a false testimony was given.
The judiciary has the final word, which helped close the case for now. Without conclusive evidence, the court finds the accused not guilty. Hamada El Arabi, Nile TV.
Iran's Navy commander Habibullah Sayari said the Iranian forces managed to capture images of a U.S. aircraft carrier. He said this operation showed that the Iranian naval forces are capable of fully supervising the area and accurately monitoring the movements of foreign forces. This comes as Iran and the West are both sharpening their tones as the international community is considering imposing new sanctions on Iran's oil industry.
Near the U.S. forces in international waters, Iran continued its naval maneuvers. These are the preliminary images aired by Iranian state TV of an aircraft carrier that it said belongs to the U.S. and was spotted by the Iranian naval forces. With these images, Iran is directly sending political and military messages.
We managed to spot an aircraft carrier belonging to the foreign forces when it was exiting the Strait of Hormuz and heading for the Sea of Oman. We also managed to take videos and photos of it. This proves our capability of monitoring foreign movements in the area.
تتحدث القوات البحرية الإيرانية عن قدرتها على إغلاق مضيق هرمز.
The Iranian naval forces said they're capable of easily closing down the Strait of Hormuz if the situation calls for it. Some websites linked to the Revolutionary Guard revealed a potential scenario of the closed-down strait. This website indicates that Iran's anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, submarines and warships can close down the strait and disrupt the naval traffic there. According to analysts, this is the last option that Iran will potentially consider.
To close down the Strait of Hormuz is the last option that Iran will choose, because our strategy for the past 30 years has been clear and is based on mutual benefits from the strait. If we are not able to benefit from the strait, then others should not benefit from it either.
Oil revenue counts for nearly 80% of Iran's budget. Therefore, it's significant for the Iranians.
For every action, there is a reaction. Closing down the strait is an act of self-defense, because imposing sanctions on our oil industry is a declaration of war.
The regime here is aware that sanctions on the oil industry may paralyze all aspects of Iran's economy and perhaps even its political life. Some believe that Iran's threat to close down the Straits of Hormuz is only a precautionary move to prevent sanctions on its oil exports. However, its implementation needs to be seriously considered from a financial standpoint, because experts believe that the move will mean transitioning from escalation to confrontation.
Six right-wing activists were arrested overnight on suspicion of involvement in the disturbances that took place at the Ephraim Army base 2 weeks ago. 7 other suspects are allegedly being held in connection with that incident. 50 protesters broke onto the IDF base, where they threw rocks and paint at vehicles, set tires on fire, and scattered nails on roads before being dispersed by troops some 20 minutes later. The vehicle of the Ephraim Brigade commander was pelted with stones, and the officer was injured during the melee. The activists reportedly stormed the base after hearing rumors of the imminent demolition of several illegal settlement outposts in the West Bank. In other news, a Palestinian-fired Qassam rocket from northern Gaza exploded in an open field in the Eshkol Regional Council this morning, causing no reported injuries or damage. Earlier, an Israeli Air Force strike targeted 2 terrorist sites within the Gaza Strip. Amid renewed rocket fire in the south, a serious disaster was averted this week at the Iron Dome missile defense system deployed in the area. Some 20 of the system's interceptor missiles fell from a vehicle at an IAF storage unit as they were being loaded onto a truck for maintenance. Apparently, the ammunition was improperly secured and dropped several meters to the ground, causing damage to the missiles but no injuries. While the rockets did not explode, the damage is estimated at hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of the munitions were declared unusable. The IDF has launched an investigation into the incident, which senior officials have declared to be a case of severe negligence. The Iron Dome system will be suspended until the initial inquiry has been completed. Here at home, Likud Knesset member Tzipi Chotobeli sat in the front row of a segregated bus line to drive home the point that women may not be sent to the back of the bus. The chairperson of the Knesset Committee on the Status of Women was not attacked or insulted, although several ultra-Orthodox men aboard the so-called Mahadrin bus sat in the back, while others refused to take the bus at all. Chotobeli described her action as part of a larger struggle for the basic democratic principles of the state. She dismissed criticism that her action was a provocation, saying that it is an inseparable part of her responsibility as an elected official to be acquainted with reality in order to change it. Chotobeli added that it is intolerable that on Mahadrin lines women are asked to sit at the back or to enter the bus from the back door. In January, the Supreme Court accepted recommendations of the Transportation Ministry, ruling that separate seating on the public Egged bus line must be completely voluntary and that it is illegal for passengers to attempt or force anyone to sit in a specific part of the vehicle. In related news, an indictment was filed today against a 44-year-old Haredi man who yesterday allegedly hurled sexist slurs at a female soldier aboard a Jerusalem bus. According to the police, Shlomo Fuchs's behavior was unruly, and he sexually harassed the soldier Doron Matalon, humiliating her through the use of derogatory comments. According to the indictment, the suspect called Matalon a slut and a shiksa, a derogatory word for a non-Jewish woman, after she refused his demand that she vacate her seat near the front of the bus and move to the back. The indictment follows a warning issued by State Prosecutor Moshe Lador, who has pledged that authorities will not tolerate the exclusion of women from the public sphere or any acts of violence committed against Israeli women.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincote Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.